I need to fetch the YouTube video to understand the original story structure before writing the new story. Good. I now have a strong picture of the original story's structure, emotional beats, and formula. Now I'll write the new story. I have people's names to avoid from the file and enough structural understanding from the original. Writing now. My daughter called me from the bathroom, not from the kitchen, not from the living room, from the bathroom, with the faucet running so he wouldn't hear her crying. That was the first time I knew something was very wrong. My name is Eleanor Hatch. I am 63 years old. For 31 years, I worked as a licensed social worker for the county of Maricopa, Arizona, with the last 18 of those years spent specifically in the Domestic Violence Services Division. I have sat across from hundreds of women, young women, older women, women who were doctors and women who were cashiers, and I have helped them build safety plans, fill out protective orders, and walk out of situations they thought they could never escape. I have testified in court. I have trained police officers on trauma response. I have seen things that do not leave you. And yet I stood in my kitchen on a Saturday evening in November, listening to the sound of my daughter trying to muffle her sobs under running water in a stranger's guest bathroom. And I felt something I had not felt in 3 decades of professional work. I felt completely helpless. That was 9 months before the dinner that changed everything. Her name is Claire. She was 31 when she met him, which I tell you not as a defense, but as context. She was not a naive girl. She had her own apartment in Tempe, a good job doing marketing for a mid-size healthcare company, a circle of friends who loved her. She was the kind of woman who fixed things herself, who didn't need rescuing. She was in many ways more capable than I had been at her age. His name was Bennett. He was 34, tall, and the kind of handsome that photographs well. He sold commercial real estate, which in Phoenix in a good market means he made real money. On their 3rd date, he brought her sunflowers because she had mentioned once, casually, that she preferred them to roses. She told me this over the phone, and I could hear the surprise in her voice that someone had listened. I liked him at first. I want to be honest about that. I liked the way he held doors open without performing it. I liked that he asked me questions about my work and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. He came to her birthday dinner that April, and he brought a bottle of good wine, and he helped clear the table without being asked. My sister, who was there, leaned over to me afterward and whispered, "He's a keeper." I nodded. The first time she called me crying from a bathroom was 8 months into their relationship. She said they had argued. She said he had grabbed her wrist and twisted it. Not hard enough to bruise, she said. Just enough to make her understand something. She used those words, just enough to make me understand something. I remember going completely still at my kitchen counter, the way you go still when you hear a sound in the night and you're deciding whether it was real. I asked her if she was safe. She said yes. I asked her if she wanted to leave, and she said she didn't know. I asked her if she wanted me to come get her, and she said, "Please don't. It would make things worse." I knew what that meant. I had heard that exact sentence from women who sat across from my desk with ice packs on their arms. But this was my daughter, and she was asking me not to come. So I waited. I sent her resources by text, not links, not the hotline number plastered at the bottom of a pamphlet, but a name. A specific counselor I trusted at a non-profit in Scottsdale. I said, "This is Margaret Tillis. She is excellent. No pressure. Just her name." Claire texted back a heart emoji. "I don't sleep well anymore. I want you to know that. I haven't since that November." Over the following months, I watched the edges of my daughter slowly change shape. She stopped talking about her friends the way she used to. She apologized a lot on the phone for small things, for calling at a bad time, for not responding to my texts quickly enough, for not being able to make it to Sunday dinner. Bennett was always there in the background, not loudly, just there. She'd mentioned he needed the car, he had a work thing, he preferred they stayed in. I wrote it all down. Old professional habit. Date, time, behavior pattern. I wrote it down and I prayed I was wrong. They got engaged the following spring. She called me from his car, he was right there, and her voice was a particular kind of bright. The brightness of someone performing for an audience. I said all the right things. I drove home afterward, and I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before I went inside. His mother's name was Gwendolyn. She was 68, recently widowed, lived in Scottsdale in a house that Bennett had helped her buy after his father passed. She dressed well, wore her silver hair in a low chignon, and had the manner of a woman who had spent her whole life being considered refined. She volunteered at her church. She had a watercolored painting of the Colorado River above her fireplace that she'd done herself. When I first met her at a dinner at Bennett's place, she squeezed my hand with both of hers and said, "I've heard so much about you." She meant it as warmth. I took it as information. I noticed, that first dinner, how she spoke to Claire. It was subtle, the kind of subtle that only registers if you've been trained to look for it or if you've been its target your whole life, she interrupted Claire gently. She rephrased things, Claire said, slightly, in a way that shifted the meaning just a degree. When Claire mentioned something she was proud of at work, Gwendolyn pivoted to something Bennett had accomplished. Small things. The kind of small things you cannot report to anyone. I drove home that night and I thought, she made him. The dinner happened in July. Claire and Bennett had moved into a house together in Chandler 6 months earlier. His mother had driven up from Scottsdale, and they had invited me for what was supposed to be a casual Sunday dinner. Grilled chicken, that kind of thing. Bennett had a patio with a big gas grill he was proud of. Claire had made her grandmother's potato salad, which she made every summer, which I had taught her. I arrived at 6. Gwendolyn was already there, seated at the patio table with a glass of white wine. She smiled at me. Bennett was at the grill. Claire was in the kitchen, finishing the salad, and when I found her in there, she hugged me for just a half second too long. The kind of hug that says something. "You okay?" I asked. "Of course," she said. She turned back to the bowl. We ate outside. The evening was warm, the way Phoenix evenings are in July. The heat of the day settling down but not gone, the air still, the sky that particular shade of orange and purple that makes you understand why people live here despite everything. Bennett poured wine. He was in good spirits, telling a story about a commercial property deal he'd nearly closed. Gwendolyn watched him with the particular attention of a woman who has been watching this specific person her whole life and still finds him fascinating. Claire was quiet. Not unusually quiet for anyone who didn't know her. But I knew her. The argument started over something small. It always does. Claire mentioned that she had been thinking about looking at different jobs. She had been approached by a recruiter, a larger company, potentially a better title, and about 12,000 more a year. She was not asking permission. She was sharing. The way people share things at dinner tables. Bennett set down his fork. It was the deliberateness of the gesture that I noticed first. Slow. The way you put something down when you are controlling your hands. "We've talked about this," he said. Claire looked at her plate. "I know, but we talked about it," he said again, quieter this time. "I just think it might be worth," and then he stood up. I want to be precise here, because in my years of work I have learned that precision matters. He did not lunge. He did not shout. He stood up from his chair with a kind of controlled deliberateness, and he reached across the table, and he struck my daughter across the face with his open hand. The sound of it, The sound is something I will carry with me until I die. Claire's head snapped to the side. Her water glass tipped and fell. She didn't make a sound. She had learned, somewhere in the year and a half they'd been together, not to make a sound. And then Gwendolyn, who was sitting 2 feet away from me, set down her own fork with that same terrible deliberateness, and she said, with complete calm, "She needs to learn to listen." I looked at her. She looked back at me without flinching. I have spent 31 years in social work. I have been trained in crisis de-escalation. I have sat in rooms with men who terrified me. I have kept my voice steady through things that made my hands shake afterward in the parking lot. Every single second of that training descended on me in that moment like a weight, and I used it. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not say a single word to either of them. I stood up, walked around the table to my daughter, and I put my hand very gently on her shoulder. She flinched, even from me, she flinched, and that is the thing that will break me when I let myself think about it. I said quietly, "Sweetheart, can you stand up for me?" She stood up. Her cheek was red, already going darker. She wouldn't look at me. "We're going to go inside for a minute," I said. "Sit down," Bennett said. "This is between me and my fiancé." I looked at him then. I want to describe the look accurately. It was not anger, though I was angry in a way I have no language for. It was something colder than anger. It was recognition. I had seen this man 100 times in 31 years. I had seen him in intake rooms and courtrooms and supervised visitation centers. I knew exactly who he was, and more importantly, I knew exactly what I was about to do. "I'm going to take a moment with my daughter," I said. My voice was very calm. "We'll be right back." I guided Claire inside. I sat her at her own kitchen table, got a dish towel, soaked it in cold water, pressed it gently to her cheek. She was shaking, not crying. Shaking, which is different. Crying can be waited out. Shaking goes all the way down. "Mom," she started. "It's okay," I said. "You don't have to say anything right now." I reached into my purse and took out my phone. I have a contact I have held for 11 years. His name is Deputy DA Robert Caswell, and I have worked alongside his office on domestic violence prosecutions for the better part of a decade. We have sat in strategy meetings together. I have given statements in cases he has tried. He owed me nothing, and he would still pick up, because that is the kind of person he is and the kind of relationship we had built through years of work I had not known until this moment would one day matter to me personally. He picked up on the second ring. I told him, briefly and precisely, what had happened: location, parties involved, nature of the assault, witness present, being myself. I told him the fiancé's mother had verbally condoned the assault in my presence. I told him I had a client. I used that word deliberately because it was accurate. Because in this moment's mind, my daughter was also my client, and I was going to treat this with the same professionalism I had given every other woman who had sat across from me needing help. He told me to keep Claire inside and to document the injury. He told me he would make a call. I took photos of Claire's cheek with my phone. She let me do this. She had stopped shaking just slightly and was looking at her own hands on the table. "I should have listened to you," she said. "No," I said. "You didn't do anything wrong. I knew. I think I always. I know," I said. "I know." Outside, I could hear Bennett's voice, lower now, and Gwendolyn's murmuring back. The particular sound of people who believe they will manage this, who have managed things like this before. 3 minutes later, 2 Chandler PD cruisers pulled onto the street. I know that sounds fast. In Maricopa County, when the Deputy DA's office makes a call regarding a domestic assault that is still in progress with a witness on scene, things can move quickly. I had not known this from the receiving end before. I knew it now. I walked back outside. Bennett saw the cruises, and his face did something I recognized from hundreds of case files. It recalibrated. He started to say something to me, something about how I had overreacted, how this was a private matter, how I had just destroyed his fiancée's home by involving the police in something I didn't understand. I let him finish. Then I said, I have been a licensed social worker in domestic violence services for 18 years. I have worked directly with the Maricopa County DA's office on 47 prosecuted domestic violence cases. I just photographed my daughter's injury. I have a witness statement from myself as to what occurred, and Gwendolyn's verbal endorsement of the assault makes her potentially liable as well. I paused. The officers are going to take your statement now. I would encourage you to be very careful about what you say. Gwendolyn had gone completely white. She said, "This is a family matter." I looked at her for a moment. I thought about all the women I had ever sat across from who had been told their entire lives that what happened to them was a family matter. I thought about the particular damage that phrase does, how it seals things, how it teaches women to absorb pain quietly so that the family's surface stays smooth. I thought about how this woman had sat 2 feet from me and watched her son strike my daughter and said she needs to learn to listen with the serenity of someone commenting on the weather. Not anymore, I said. Bennett was charged that night with domestic battery, Class 1 misdemeanor under Arizona statute, elevated to aggravated assault, given the documented injury. Gwendolyn was interviewed on the scene. Given her verbal statement endorsing the assault, the DA's office reviewed whether she could be considered complicit under Arizona's witness liability considerations. Ultimately, she was not charged, but she was formally cautioned, which I watched happen from Claire's kitchen window, and which I will not pretend gave me no satisfaction. Claire stayed at my house that night. She slept in her old room, in the bed she had slept in since she was 9 years old, and I sat in the hallway for a while, listening to her breathe, the way I had when she was small and sick, and I needed to know she was still there. She filed for a dissolution of the engagement the following week. Bennett's attorney called my daughter 3 times before she retained her own lawyer. A woman I referred her to, someone I had worked alongside for years, who does not charge clients who are fleeing documented abusive situations. His attorney sent a letter implying that Claire had provoked the incident. Her attorney's response was 4 sentences. I have read those 4 sentences, and I am proud of them. Bennett pled no contest 4 months later. He was sentenced to 12 months of supervised probation, mandatory completion of a 52-week batterers intervention program, and 200 hours of community service. Gwendolyn, to my knowledge, has not called my daughter since the night in question. I do not know if she has reflected on what she said. I find I have stopped needing to know. The thing I want to tell you, the thing that keeps me awake still, even with all of it resolved, is about the sunflowers. A few weeks after the night in Chandler, Claire and I were cleaning out some boxes from her old apartment that she'd never fully unpacked. They had been sitting in my garage since her move, and in one of them she found a dried sunflower from a bouquet that had come from their 3rd date. She had dried it and kept it. She held it for a moment, and then she put it very carefully in the recycling bag. She didn't say anything about it, neither did I, but that is the part that costs something. Not the courtroom part, not the part with the police cruisers or the attorney or the phone call to Robert Caswell. Those parts I knew how to do. I had done versions of them for decades. The part that costs something is the dried sunflower. The part where my daughter loved a man who listened when she mentioned, once, that she preferred sunflowers. The part where that was real, even if everything it built on top of it was not. You can spend 31 years learning to identify abusers, and you will not be able to explain to your daughter how a person can be both things at once. You will not be able to make that simpler than it is. She is doing well, my daughter. That is not a performance of optimism. I have enough professional experience to know the difference between genuine recovery and the face people put on for the people who are watching. She has been seeing the counsellor I referred her to, Margaret Tillis, for 7 months now. She told me recently that she had gone on one date with someone a friend had introduced her to, and that he was fine, nice even, but she wasn't ready yet. She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, the way you say something you have genuinely processed and arrived at. I told her there was no timeline. She nodded. Then she said, "You know what I keep thinking about?" And I said, "What?" And she said, "I keep thinking about how I called you from the bathroom that first time, with the water running, and how you didn't say anything dramatic. You just asked me if I was safe, and then you gave me her name. You didn't push." She looked at me. "That's what let me get there on my own," she said. "I don't know if you know that. I didn't tell her that I had sat in my car that night for 40 minutes before I could drive home. I didn't tell her that I had pulled up my own training materials at 2 in the morning to make sure I was doing it right. That I, a woman who had supervised a team of 12 for 6 years, had pulled up the manual to make sure I was doing it right with my own daughter. I didn't tell her any of that. I just said, "I know, baby. I knew you'd get there. That is the part they don't train you for. Every protocol I have ever written, every training I have ever led, every manual and procedure and best practice document, none of it teaches you how to be the mother and the professional at the same time. How to hold the knowledge of what is happening to your child and still give her the space she needs to find her own way out. How to make a phone call with a steady voice when your hands are shaking. Nobody teaches you that. You just do it, because she needs you to. And then you go home and you sit in your driveway for 40 minutes, and you don't tell anyone, and you get up the next morning, and you answer when she calls.